I never thought a peaceful evening in my remote cabin would turn into a full-blown nightmare. The knock on the door wasn't a knock. It was a smash. The HOA broke in like they had a warrant from the heavens. But they didn't know who was with me. And if they had, they would have thought twice. What happened next? Let's just say the rules didn't protect them this time. It was just past midnight when the wind outside started howling louder than usual. My cabin, nestled at the far edge of the neighborhood, barely considered part of the HOA jurisdiction, was meant to be a place of peace and escape. I'd chosen it for its isolation, far away from the judgmental stares, nosy board members, and obsessive rule enforcement that the HOA was infamous for. No trimmed hedges? Citation. Garage door open too long? Fine. But out here I was sure I had escaped their claws. Or so I thought. That night, I had lit a fire and made some tea. My guest curled up silently on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. She wasn't from the neighborhood. She wasn't even from this city. The circumstances of her being there were complicated, private. She was someone I never expected to reconnect with, and certainly not under these conditions. But as fate would have it, the very night she arrived was the night everything spiraled out of control. It started with the headlights. 2 cars. No sound, just blinding beams cutting through the trees outside the front window. I stood up slowly, confused, and maybe a little alarmed. Nobody should have been out here, especially not this late. I stepped to the window and peeked between the curtain folds. What I saw drained the warmth out of my chest instantly. HOA security. I recognized the logo even from a distance, those black SUVs with the gold-lettered seal that screamed authority, but only in the way a neighborhood could pretend to have it. Normally, they'd send 1 patrol car to drop off warnings or reports about grass length. 2 meant something else. 2 meant someone was serious. Before I could fully process what they were doing here, the first vehicle door slammed. Then another. Then voices. Muffled but aggressive. I motioned for my guest to stay put and moved quietly toward the door, not opening it, just pressing my ear against the wood. That's when I heard it. "We know he's in there. HOA violation or not, we've got orders." Orders? Since when did a homeowners association issue midnight orders? I backed away, heart thudding harder than it should have. I wasn't hiding drugs. I wasn't running some secret business. Sure, I was technically violating some obscure clause about long-term guests without notice, but they'd never cared about enforcement this deep into the woods. It didn't add up. And then came the bang. Not a knock. Not a tap. A bang. Like a battering ram had slammed into the door. I jumped back, my guest gasping behind me. She clutched the blanket tighter and stared at the entrance like it might fall off its hinges. Another bang. Splinters cracked at the edges of the frame. They were trying to force their way in. "Open the door or we're coming in," a voice shouted from outside. Male. Aggressive. Not a tone used for neighborhood disputes over paint color. I called out through the door, asking what this was about. No response. Just another hit to the door. My cabin wasn't built like the newer homes. They hadn't anticipated an assault when they chose rustic charm over security. The wood groaned, then split slightly near the lock. I scrambled to block the door with a nearby chair, but I knew it wouldn't hold long. My guest stood up now, her eyes wide, panic and disbelief mixing on her face. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to being hunted. They didn't give a final warning. The final crash came suddenly. Door swinging inward with a sharp crack as it splintered off one of its hinges. The 2 uniformed men stormed in like they were SWAT, one holding what looked like a clipboard, the other a stun baton. Not a single badge of real law enforcement, just HOA patches on their sleeves. I raised my hands instinctively, stepping between them and my guest. "What the hell is this?" I asked. My voice was steady, but my insides churned. "You've been warned, Mr. Lane," the first officer said coldly. "Unauthorized guest. HOA violation 14B, subsection 9, unregistered occupancy past 48 hours. You refused to answer correspondence." "Correspondence?" I barked. "I haven't received anything. That's not our fault. Orders are orders." That's when the second man shifted his attention behind me. His eyes landed on her. Everything about his posture changed, shoulders tensed, face paled, breath caught. It was instant recognition, not confusion, not surprise, something deeper, something personal. She stepped out from behind me slowly, saying nothing. The silence grew heavy, like the cabin itself had frozen in time. The man with the baton lowered it an inch, eyes flicking to his partner, then back to her. Whatever plan they'd come with, it was now in shambles, and none of us had any idea what would happen next. The silence in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. The air, once filled with the simple crackle of firewood and soft conversation, now buzzed with tension. One of the HOA enforcers stood frozen, his eyes locked on the woman standing beside me. The clipboard in his hand trembled slightly. It was a small detail, but I noticed. My guest didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply stood tall, calm, as if the world around her hadn't just collapsed into chaos. The reaction she drew from him was chilling and telling. This wasn't some run-of-the-mill inspection. They knew her, or at least he did. And judging by the fear now simmering beneath his forced expression, it wasn't a friendly recognition. The second enforcer, the one who had been shouting orders just moments ago, looked at his partner with confusion. "What's wrong with you? Cuff him," he said sharply, pointing to me. But his words didn't register with the first man. His gaze never left her. Finally, he spoke, his voice cracked and quiet, like he was trying to convince himself she was real. "It's her." That was all he said. The firelight flickered across her face, and I saw a change in her too. Her usual guarded calm had hardened. Her eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. She was no longer playing the quiet guest. She was someone else now, someone with a history that had just caught up to her. I stepped slightly in front of her again, unsure whether to protect her or shield myself. I didn't know what I was getting into. All I knew was that something much bigger was unfolding than a late-night HOA raid. "You shouldn't be here," the man whispered, taking one hesitant step back. "Neither should you," she replied, voice cold but steady. The tension cracked like lightning through the room. The second enforcer finally seemed to realize something was wrong. "Will someone explain what the hell is going on?" he barked, baton still in hand, though less sure of how to use it now. She looked directly at him, then turned her gaze to the man with the clipboard. "Tell him, Mark," she said. "Tell him who I am." Mark didn't answer immediately. His hand dropped the clipboard, and it hit the wooden floor with a hollow clap. I watched him wrestle with something inside himself, like years of buried secrets were clawing their way to the surface. I could see the sweat bead at his temple. He glanced toward the door, probably considering running, but it was too late. They'd already broken in. Whatever this was, it was already in motion. The other man looked from Mark to her, frustration turning into something closer to dread. "You know this woman?" Mark nodded once, then said, "She's not supposed to be alive." The words sent a chill through me. I looked at her, expecting her to deny it, to laugh it off, but she didn't. She just stared back at him, completely unflinching. "She disappeared 5 years ago," Mark went on. "There was an incident, an internal investigation. Classified. Classified by the HOA? I asked incredulously, trying to grasp what I was hearing. "She was a contractor," Mark said, his voice trembling again. "Not just legal, not just code enforcement. She was special clearance. They used her when things got out of hand." The second enforcer looked rattled now. "Used her? What do you mean used her?" "She was sent to clean up something," Mark continued. "Something she wasn't supposed to survive. But she did. And then she vanished." My guest finally spoke again. "I vanished because I had to. Because I saw what really goes on behind those boardroom meetings and violations. You think you're just enforcing community standards. You have no idea what you're a part of." Her words hit like hammers. I felt as though I'd stepped into a much darker story than I ever intended. The HOA wasn't just an annoying bureaucratic force trying to regulate mailbox height and trash bin hours. It was hiding something deeper, something sinister, and she had been part of it once. The room was deathly quiet again, except for the occasional crack from the fire. Mark was visibly shaken now. They told us you were compromised, that you couldn't be trusted. They wiped your records. She nodded slowly. Because I found out the truth. And I wasn't going to help them bury it. I could feel the weight of every word between them. Mark's face was pale, the clipboard on the ground forgotten. The second man had backed away slightly, his baton now lowered to his side. Neither of them seemed to have any idea what to do next. And the one thing I now understood with absolute certainty was that my guest was far more than she appeared to be. The flickering shadows from the fire danced across the cabin walls as the atmosphere grew heavier, charged with layers of untold history. I watched them, the enforcers, shift uneasily on their feet. The man named Mark still hadn't moved from his spot. His expression was locked in something between fear and regret. The other one, more junior, looked out of his depth like he had walked into a play halfway through and realized it wasn't fiction. But it was the silence between my guest and Mark that said the most. It wasn't just recognition. It was memory, and not the good kind. I glanced at her again, standing so still it was almost unnatural. Whatever she had been in the past, whatever role she had played in the murky operations of the HOA, was surfacing now in full. But what caught me off guard was the way Mark looked at her. Not just like she was a ghost from the past, but like she was a consequence of something he'd done. The guilt wasn't passive. It was alive in his eyes. "Tell him," she said again, her voice firmer this time, directed at Mark. "Tell him why they sent me in." Mark swallowed hard. His hands, no longer steady, trembled at his sides. "You don't understand," he said to me, though his eyes never left her. "This neighborhood, the HOA, it's not just about rules. It's a cover, a structure for containment." "Containment of what?" I asked, my voice sharp now, adrenaline creeping into my bloodstream. Mark hesitated, then finally spoke, his voice quiet. "Things that shouldn't exist." My breath caught. I looked back at her, but she didn't look surprised. She looked resigned, like she had been waiting for this truth to come out. Mark turned toward his colleague, whose eyes had widened, clearly not briefed on any of this. "They built these communities on specific land," Mark continued. "Places with properties, energies, ancient boundaries, and sometimes things seep through. People report strange sightings, odd behavior, unexplainable events. The HOA investigates, but not in the way people think." I blinked, trying to process his words. "So you're saying the HOA is some kind of, what, paranormal containment agency disguised as a neighborhood watch?" "It sounds crazy, I know," Mark admitted. "But your guest here, she was part of a special operations division created to neutralize anomalies. Her division operated off the books. No traces, no witnesses, no survivors if necessary." I turned to her, my heart pounding. "You never told me any of this." "I wasn't allowed to," she said softly. "The moment I tried to leave, they erased me, labeled me as a liability." Mark was there the day I was sent into the Sanderson unit. "Do you remember what they told us, Mark?" He nodded slowly. "That the house had gone cold, everyone inside dead, that it was a threat to the integrity of the neighborhood. They said you volunteered." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I was ordered, and when I made it out, they cut me off." "What happened inside?" I asked, barely above a whisper. She looked into the fire, her voice barely a murmur. "The family didn't just— I didn't think they'd actually leave you there." The younger enforcer, stunned by every word, looked at Mark like he'd never seen him before. "You signed off on something like that?" "I was just following protocol," Mark muttered. "That's what they all say," she replied coldly. The weight of her words sank into the room. It wasn't just about some supernatural cover-up or rogue HOA activities anymore. It was personal. These weren't just secrets buried beneath board meetings and homeowner complaints. These were betrayals. Choices made by people who traded humanity for order. And now, all those decisions had— Mark stepped back, his foot accidentally nudging the fallen clipboard. The noise was small, but it triggered something. The younger enforcer, overwhelmed and unsure which side to stand on, lifted his baton again and pointed it toward her. Don't move, he warned, his voice betraying the fear he tried to mask with authority. She didn't flinch. Her eyes slowly turned toward him, but it wasn't a look of challenge. It was disappointment. I could feel the shift, subtle but potent. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to explain herself again. Whatever power she had buried deep inside her from her past was starting to rise, and for the first time, I wondered if I even knew who she really was. Mark noticed it too. He raised his hand toward his partner, trying to de-escalate. Lower it, he said quickly. Don't provoke her. She's unregistered, unauthorized, and apparently connected to some Black Ops HOA unit I've never even heard of, the younger man snapped. I have no idea what's going on, and no one's answering their radios. That's when I realized the radios hadn't buzzed at all. No backup, no check-ins, no static, just silence. Mark looked toward the open doorway behind them and cursed under his breath. They jammed it. She jammed it? The younger man asked, eyes wide. No, Mark said, shaking his head. Not her. Them. They knew this meeting might happen. They're watching us. Who's they? I demanded. The board. Mark nodded slowly, eyes darting around the cabin now like it held ears in the walls. They never trusted me after what happened with her. I covered for her when I filed the report. Said the place was empty when I got there. They probably had doubts ever since. This entire raid, it wasn't about you. You were just bait. His words sent a sick chill through me. They used me to lure her out. Yes, she said quietly. And now they're waiting to see how this plays out. Whether I kill you, or you kill me. The younger enforcer's face turned white. What kind of sick operation are we even part of? The temperature in the room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. The fire still burned in the hearth, but it offered no warmth. I could feel the pressure building, something unnatural threading its way through the air like static before a lightning strike. She stepped forward, and both men tensed, but Mark didn't stop her this time. You brought them to me? She said to him, voice low and bitter. Even if it was unknowingly, you led them here. I didn't know, he repeated, but it sounded more like an apology now. They're coming, she said, turning toward the open door. How do you know? I asked. Because they've always had a backup plan, she replied. The HOA doesn't allow anomalies to roam free. If I didn't die during containment, they'd send something that would finish the job. And if you're here when it arrives, a distant rumble echoed from the woods. It wasn't a vehicle. It didn't sound like anything mechanical. It was a low, guttural sound, like something large and breathing. The kind of sound that bypassed logic and went straight into the primal part of your brain, the part that recognized danger long before you could explain why. What the hell is that? The young enforcer whispered, stepping closer to the window and peering out into the night. Something summoned, she answered. Mark's face went rigid. They released it? They must be desperate, she said, or afraid I might talk. Another sound now, closer this time. A heavy thud, then a dragging noise. Trees shifted in the distance. Shadows moved that shouldn't have. The young enforcer backed away from the window, face pale and slick with sweat. We're not trained for this. No, she said. You were never meant to survive this part. I looked to her, searching her expression for a trace of fear, but there was none. Just the hardened edge of someone who'd seen worse and made it back to tell the tale. Mark stepped beside her, eyes darting toward the hallway where I kept emergency supplies. Do we run? If we do, she said slowly, it follows. The room was quickly turning into a cage. The fire popped violently, sending a small spray of sparks across the hearth. The younger man dropped his baton entirely now, too shaken to hold it. He was realizing, just like I was, that the real threat had nothing to do with HOA violations or missing paperwork. The real threat was just beyond the tree line, coming straight for us. The wind outside surged suddenly, carrying with it a strange static that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Whatever was in those woods wasn't moving like a person, or even like an animal. There was a rhythm to its movement, but it wasn't natural. Heavy thuds alternated with dragging noises, like something enormous was crawling toward us with deliberate intent. No one in the room said anything for a long beat. Then, as if compelled by the silence, the fire snapped loudly, causing the younger enforcer to jump and stumble back toward the wall. He looked younger than ever now, stripped of his uniformed confidence. His face was pale and confused, his entire worldview cracking before our eyes. She moved calmly toward the window. Her silhouette stood firm as the firelight danced along her shoulders. When she parted the curtain just slightly, I watched her expression sharpen, her eyes narrowing to slits. "It's here," she whispered, more to herself than to us. "They didn't just send it, they gave it full form." Mark walked over, almost afraid to look out with her. "Is it the same one?" She nodded, slowly. "I thought I destroyed it in Sanderson. But apparently the board had other plans. I didn't want to ask, but I had to." "What is it?" She turned to me, and the weight of her stare felt like it belonged to someone who had seen far too much. "It was once human," she said. "A failed enforcer. Someone who disobeyed orders during a containment breach. The board punished him, turned him into something else. A deterrent. They keep him sealed until they need to send a message." The younger enforcer let out a choked breath. "A message to who?" "To anyone who breaks the cycle," she said. "To anyone who remembers too much or refuses to disappear." That's when the pounding started, not at the door, but from underneath the cabin itself. The floorboards groaned violently, as though something massive had brushed against the supports. Dust shook loose from the ceiling. The fire flickered and dimmed, then flared as if gasped. I stumbled back, bumping into the table as she reached down to pull a knife from her boot. Long, black-bladed, worn but sharp. Mark followed suit, drawing a compact firearm from inside his coat. I hadn't realized he was even armed, but of course he was. Whatever rules governed normal life in the neighborhood clearly didn't apply here. "What do we do?" I asked, unable to keep the tremor out of my voice. She didn't answer at first. Her eyes scanned the walls, the exits, the weapons available, calculating risks and possibilities. Then she said, "We hold it here. We don't run." Mark frowned. "The protocol is isolation. Secure and wait for backup." "There is no backup," she snapped. "The board sent this thing in knowing it wouldn't stop. It's not coming for you. It's coming for me. And it won't leave." She stepped to the center of the room, standing tall in front of the fireplace, blade in hand, and her eyes locked on the door. "They bred it to track me," she said. "It can sense who I am, what I've done. That's how it finds its targets. It smells guilt." The walls shook again, a low groan rolling through the beams. A thin crack appeared in the ceiling, small flecks of insulation drifting down. Outside, the night had gone dead silent, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The air in the room turned heavy, pressing in on us like invisible hands. It wasn't just fear, it was presence. Something was right outside now. Mark moved to her side, as if remembering for the first time who she used to be. "You were the best of us," he said quietly. "Even after what they did to you, I hoped—" "You hoped I wouldn't survive," she interrupted. He didn't answer. That silence said more than words could. Their history ran deeper than I'd realized. What once might have been trust between them had become ash long ago. Still, here they were, standing side by side in the face of something neither of them fully controlled anymore. The floor creaked again, this time just behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing there. But the sound, it had moved. Whatever it was inside now. Or it knew how to be. She turned slowly, sensing the same thing. "It's not going to wait for an invitation," she muttered. Another gust of wind hit the cabin, blowing the front door shut with a deep slam. The fire snapped violently again. The younger enforcer whimpered and backed toward the hallway. Mark pointed his weapon toward the sound, his breathing short and ragged. She took a slow step forward, her hand tightening on the blade. Her eyes locked on the far corner of the room where shadows seemed to pool unnaturally thick. "It's hunting," she whispered, "and it already knows which of us is ready to die." The cabin was no longer a safe space. It had become a battleground. Whatever the HOA had unleashed into those woods, it was inside now. We could all feel it. Not just hear or see, but feel. A pressure in the room like gravity shifting, like something was warping the air itself. The shadows didn't behave the way they should. They clung too long in corners, stretched in the wrong directions, moved even when the firelight didn't. There were no footsteps, no voices, just the creeping sense of doom slowly coiling around us. She stood at the center of it all, like the eye of the storm, calm but fierce, blade in hand and eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Mark was at her side, gun raised, though his grip wasn't as steady as before. The younger enforcer had retreated to the far wall, trembling and whispering to himself as if repeating a prayer he didn't believe. And I, caught in the middle of a story I hadn't written, stood frozen with only my breath and pulse to remind me I was still alive. The walls groaned again, not from pressure but from something inside them. The wood cracked subtly, as if it were breathing. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't bound by space the way we understood it. Could pass through barriers. It didn't obey doors or floors. Its presence was dimensional, bleeding through reality like ink in water. She turned to me without moving her body, her voice steady. If it touches you, it won't kill you. Not at first. It will take your mind, your memories. It will rewrite who you are. Then it uses you to get closer to me. Mark muttered a curse. They really sent it fully formed? I didn't think they'd go this far, she replied. Not unless the board was collapsing. The younger enforcer finally spoke, his voice shaking. What does that mean? Collapsing? They're desperate, she answered. Sending this thing without backup, without containment support. It means they're losing control. Probably internally fractured. And if that's the case, then this attack isn't just about me. It's about power. It's about silencing everyone connected to what came before. Mark's face turned pale. I signed off on Sanderson. I'm connected. She nodded slowly. That's why it hasn't attacked yet. It's waiting, feeding off our fear, deciding who to take first. The lights in the cabin flickered once, then again. The fire flared unnaturally, flames stretching high, illuminating every object in the room like a camera flash. In that moment, we all saw it. A shape in the farthest corner. Not fully formed, not solid. Like a silhouette made of ash and fog, tall and twisted. It didn't move like a man. Pulsed. Like it breathed and flickered at the same time. Everyone stepped back instinctively except her. She stayed where she was, eyes fixed on the shape, blade raised. Stay behind me, she said firmly. It shifted then. Not walking, gliding. It moved along the ceiling like a smear of oil, its limbs dragging loosely as if held together by memory rather than muscle. Mark fired once, the shot deafening, but the bullet passed through with no effect. It didn't even flinch. Don't shoot, she said. It only feeds off aggression. The younger enforcer panicked and bolted for the door, yanking it open. But outside, the world was wrong. Everything beyond the threshold had gone black, like the forest had been erased. No wind, no sound, just a void. He stepped out and then he was gone. Not pulled, not snatched, gone. Like he had never existed at all. I stumbled back, eyes wide. Where did he go? Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. She took a slow breath and stepped toward the entity, whispering something I couldn't hear. A language I didn't recognize. The creature twitched violently, as if her words struck it physically. The shadows bent inward. The pressure in the room increased tenfold. This ends here, she said aloud now. I know what you are. The creature hissed. Not a sound made by lungs or throat, but a scraping, rustling noise like wind through bone. Then, to our horror, it began to speak. Not in words, but in voices. Our voices. Mine. Mark's. Even the younger enforcer's scream from moments ago echoed back at us, twisted and layered through the air like 100 memories collapsing into one. It wasn't just feeding off fear. It was collecting us, replicating, becoming. Mark staggered. It's binding to us. She turned to him, eyes fierce. Then we sever the bond. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a worn object, looked like bone, carved and ancient. It shimmered slightly in the light. This is what they never meant for me to keep. The creature recoiled at the sight of it, its form distorting more violently now, tendrils of shadow snapping and recoiling like whipped chains. Mark's eyes widened. That's a board key. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the entity, her body tense as if preparing for one final confrontation. The air turned electric. Dust lifted from the floor as if gravity itself was warping. And the shadows began to scream. S9.